Right, good evening, everybody. Your systems are working. I'm just watching the numbers tot up down the participants. So we'll give it a couple of minutes before I bring out our guests this evening out of the dressing room. They're sitting back there in the hospitality lounge at the moment. So thank you for coming along this evening. And just before we start, one thing I'd like to say is that the point of this evening is to have some fun. It's a light-hearted chat with two people who've been around doing this for a while, have got some stories to tell, have done a load of stuff. So we're not covering this year because there's nothing that anybody can say that's interesting or fun about it. I don't think. We've all talked about it. We've all said it. I'm sure there may well be a few questions. We'll see what crops up. But generally speaking, we're looking at who we are, where we were, what we've been doing, and all the things we've done along the way, rather than stuff. So this is hosted by We Make Events Speakeasy, which, if you haven't looked at it, is well worth a visit. Gavin and his team have put together some fabulous stuff, and there'll be information cropping up about that in the chat as we go along. And John, who is our lovely host who's making all this work this evening, will send some more information out, and maybe we'll send an email. But just keep an eye on what's in the chat, because there are links to all the things that are going on. I'll talk about it a bit more later on. I've got some instructions. So yeah, there's a in the speakeasy there's a calendar. You can see what's going on. You can register for these sessions. There's some good chats. I think that historic ones will be made available for watching again if you miss out on anything. And this weekend are the survival sessions. So it kicks off with Joe Bygraves at 8 o'clock on Saturday. And goes through. There are DJ sessions. There's all sorts of stuff going on over the weekend. And the whole point of the speakeasy is to give people a chance to get together. So make use of it, pass it on to other people, get people involved, and just talk. And the other thing that came out today, I don't know if you've all seen it, is the We Make Events Christmas advert. Have a look at that. It's on Facebook, it's on Instagram, it's on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. You'll get a copy in the post. It's everywhere. Please share it with people. It's lovely. We thought about showing it this evening, but it's not something you can follow. It's a bit too emotional, but do have a look. Do share it with friends who don't know what it is we'll do for a living, and get people to join in. So we've got a healthy number of people joined. Thank you all very much for giving up your evening. And now let's welcome our guests in this evening. So we're talking to Bryan from White Light and Dave from Neg Earth. So this is the bit where there's awkward pause and walk-in music as they come across the stage, pick up their microphones and put them on, and join us. Pick up their microphones and put them on, Bryan.
He's still trying to find his glasses.
Got my glasses.
So welcome, guys. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming to talk about stuff. We've got a bunch of people watching this evening. There's 24, 25 out there at the moment. We're threatened with some more, so hopefully they'll join in. As we go along, I'll be asking some questions. There's a chance for you guys to put questions in the Q&A box. So anything that goes in there, we'll ask. If you want to ask a question yourself, raise your hand. What we'll do is collate all the ones that refer to unpaid invoices and do those in one group at the end. So we'll just get that out of the way in one hit. But in the meantime, let's kick off. So Dave, just do us a very brief introduction for people who may not know you or your company. So what is Neg Earth? What do you do? Who do you do it for?
We're a lighting company in the entertainment industry. We do big bands, small bands. We've been around since 1983, and we're based in London. And what can I say?
That's it. That's fine.
Yep.
And Bryan, how about White Light? I'm guessing there's a clue in the name.
Yep. I mean, that's how most people know us. Over the last few years, we've diversified into video and audio, and whilst that's been a painful process, thank God for it for the last 12 months. Oh no, I'm not talking about this year, are we? I've been there since it started nearly 50 years ago, and John Simpson started it. I'm hoping I don't contradict anything John said on the Fireside chat last week. I haven't yet watched it, so but I joined in '87, and there was 17 of us when I joined, and we went to the pub every lunchtime.
Yeah, I remember doing that. Okay, brilliant. Well, so before that, we first met when you were on the hire bench in Nine Elms at Theatre Projects, which was a very long time ago, with Fred and Swilbins and all the joys that went with all of that. So how did you get there? What got you into this? What got you started?
When you first said that question, you asked that question, I was actually going to say the 170 bus that used to go from to Nine Elms, because it was a hateful place to get to walking along Nine Elms.
It was horrible.
So I got into, like a lot of us, got into backstage stuff at school. Realised that the people backstage went to the pub quicker than anyone on stage, and they didn't have to go to rehearsals. Ended up at Imperial College somehow, not for long. And Imperial had very good connections with White Light because they're local, and there was a good old lags. Lots, because the Union Bar at Imperial College, if anyone knows it, behind the Albert Hall, we used to be the cheapest place to get a beer in central London. A lot of ex-students used to come back and drink there, and there was a lot of industry people. So Nick Moran, Matthew Tonks, who's now at Tate, Nicky Scott, who was at Tate, Andy Cave, Kinesis, Dave Ishwood, who's at White Light, Nigel Walker, who's up in Manchester, up in DBN, he was ex-Imperial. And at the time I got thrown out of college for spending too much time up ladders, Nick and someone else, Andy Cave, were at TP, and there was a job going, and I ended up there for 2 or 3 years, and then John Simpson rang me up and invited me for a coffee, and I think it was the last cup of coffee he ever made me, and it's 30 odd years since. So
excellent. All right, well, we'll cover that 30 years in a minute. And then Dave, so when we spoke yesterday, I mentioned that we first met when you sacked me off a gig in the 1980s. So how did you reach such a position of awesome power that you could throw people off crews willy-nilly?
Well, I don't know about that, really. Awesome power? Isn't the awesome power the clients?
Yes, and it was in that case as well, actually.
Ones that, I think it was not me, it was the client insisting that you move on. I don't know.
How did Meg Earth start? How did you kick the whole thing off?
A friend of mine was playing in a band. And he said to me one day, "Hey, come and help us, do some lights for us." And I went, "Well, I haven't got any lights." So we found a few bits and borrowed a few bits, and all of a sudden I was doing a light show for a band in a pub. It was great. And we got a few more lights, and then eventually I had to go and get a job because I didn't get my A-levels. And did that, got this other job for a while, and then got bored with it. I'll do this full time, it'll be fine. This will be really, really be great. And that was the start, really. A garage in Portsmouth.
Excellent. And do you think that's still a way into business for people now, that just kind of falling into it rather than college qualifications? Do you find that many of the people who work for you just turn up?
I don't know about that. Now it's all clever people. There's all that DMX stuff and Ethicon and all that sort of, MA3s and stuff that you need a degree to work it, And, now there's a lot of young kids that come and they do a great job. Really, really show up the grown-ups how to run the systems, design them, and really, really keen. And we try and get as many of them. I'm sure Bryan is the same.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that's slightly different between the two of you is that, Bryan, you came into a business that was already existing. White Light was a strong business. So how's it changed? How's it grown up during your umpteen years there?
Yeah, we talked briefly yesterday, didn't we, about tipping points, and I've been trying to sort of identify them ever since we talked about that. And I think they were driven by the industry, where, and I know I've done this talk with new joiners, where the industry, about the time we first met, went into this massive growth spurt in the 90s. where I think it was a combination of rock and roll, had money. People started spending money on stadium tours. Musical theatre started spending money. We suddenly went, just before I joined, a big budget for a theatre show was 500 quid a week. In 1989, we did Miss Saigon, that between us and Very Light was 10 grand a week. Suddenly we had moving lights on shows, Time and things like that. And at the same time, there was that massive growth of a sort of corporate theatre, it was called for a while, wasn't it? I mean, we both were involved, certainly in my TP days, in some stupid jobs to do launch of share prices and things like that. British Gas AGM, which was the whole of the NEC from memory, with only about 4 people and a dog turning up. And that put a lot of money into the industry. So companies like Neg and White Light were able to go out and buy kit because there was a demand for it and we could make money on it. And so I think 90s was definitely a growth period. I mean, we went from 30, 40 people to 100 odd people in those 10 years. And I think we were about 120 people at the end of the century. We moved in 2001 down to Wimbledon. And of course, we've now got staff who weren't born when we were in Fulham, which I find very depressing. And that was the next tipping point. I mean, obviously 2001, 2002 was a little bit of a hiatus. But then 2002 onwards, DMX, moving lights, we started investing a lot in moving lights. And I think we ended up at about 276. But the last tipping point was probably about 5 years ago. Andy Hook from Shock Solutions joined us and brought a video expertise. Lee Denison joined us from Delta and brought some audio expertise, because all the management team were a bunch of lampies. And we needed some grown-ups who actually understood how to make things buzz and hum and flicker and charge more money than lights for. And that triggered a great growth spurt. And we've been about 5 years and more or less the same turnover, about 20 million a year, which was mostly lighting, nearly all lighting. And last year was 40 million. We doubled over the 4 or 5 years. So and I suspect this is another tipping point. Just not quite sure which way it's going to go.
Yeah, it'll all be good. So Dave, your history is slightly different in that Neg Earth is very much your baby, or you and Pip's baby. How does it feel to have built something up from scratch and turned into a grown-up now?
It's just great the way it's turned out, but it's been a very, very hard slog on the way, and it's not over yet. We've over the years chipped away at the opposition and pushed as hard as we can with the tours that have come up in our way, and fought hard for them. Always try to do a great job, and then you'll be really busy, and then someone will say, "Can you do this job for us? Can you help us out with this?" And so you end up buying a little bit more gear and a little bit more gear. Bryan knows that one. And you just keep on getting more people, and you need more space, and it just keeps on growing, and providing you can do a good job, and you've got to do a great job, and you've got to look after people. And that's what we try and do. We've been very, very well supported by a great team, both in the office and in the warehouse, and some just great freelancers. They're just, going to work as many hours it takes to put that lighting rig up, and then take it all down and do it all again the next day. We've have some really good people on board, and it's not great to see them now really struggling.
No.
Anyway,
No,
we're going into 2020.
No, we're not. We'll stop just before we get there. Yes, I mean, one of the things that I've talked about over the years is sometimes, are we our own worst enemies in terms of getting the show going? Are there times when things really shouldn't have happened, but because the crew didn't give up and didn't accept that there wasn't enough time to do everything, things just carry on going?
But then you'd just be rubbish, wouldn't you? You didn't pull it together. You didn't manage to make it happen. And nobody wants that. The crew don't want it. We don't want it. So we always put it together. And and eventually someone says, hey, would you like another person? I've got £100 a week for that person, you know, would you like to get another guy on the tour? And you go, yeah, great. And it happens a little bit easier. Or alternatively, you get into a routine, don't you? And it all happens and everyone goes, well, what was all the fuss about?
Yeah. But do you find that, and this is one for both of you, do you find you grow and develop your crew? Because, we're not an industry for jobsworths. We're not an industry for someone who says, 5:30, I'm going home. And I'm sure you both have people like that who come in the door and don't necessarily last very long. Is there a communication that goes on about recommendation between companies? Do you ever pass staff backwards and forwards?
Bizarrely, it's I think because the cultures they're both people-focused cultures, very much so. I think we've got mutual admiration for both teams, but like a lot of other companies, there is a culture, and people tend to fit into a white light culture, or they tend to fit into a neg type culture. We've had a couple of people go each way, but generally they've gone which way sort of within 6 months, because they quite often they fall in love with the industry, but they go, actually, I'm going to go and try a slightly different work culture, because there are people in the industry who hop around company to company to company, and I don't think either of our companies particularly embrace those people massively. And equally, the last I'm not talking about this year at all, but we have looked obviously very hard at who we've got in the team, and the absolute stars are the homegrown people. No disrespect to any staff who are on here who weren't homegrown. In fact, I know 2 of them are on this call. But the apprentices, the ex-apprentices are absolute. You chop their head off and they've got blue blood. And because they've grown up with the culture, with the way we work, and I think Dave's the same with your best people are the people who joined you in the warehouse and worked their way through, and ended up in the office or ended out on site or whatever. And I think that's probably the same for most companies, if I'm honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it is. I think it's a culture that runs across the industry that the show must go on and everyone will make it happen. Come hell or high water, unfortunately.
Yeah, one of the things we did a survey. That's definitely not my dog.
That's Eric. Someone's at the front door.
Just pretty surprised. I forgot what I was going to say now. Oh no, we did the survey, didn't we, earlier in the year, and 50% of people join the industry under the age of 20, and no one ever leaves it. That was quite interesting, that there's so many people join our industry so young, and they basically don't leave. Their average length, they go on to their 40s and 50s and beyond.
And beyond.
Yeah. Yes.
And beyond.
Way beyond. So Bryan, you touched briefly on tipping points. Dave, if we were to go back to Neg Earth and talk about tipping points and boxes of matches and fires and things, obviously there was quite a critical moment for you when all your stuff went up in flames. Was that a point where you ever thought about just walking away and leaving it?
No, because we had to do WWE and the Michael Mechanics tour. There's not a lot I could do. No, we weren't done, and we left a lot of people that they needed a job, and we just got on with it with tremendous support from everybody, and rebuilt the company, new premises, and away we went. Pretty hard time though.
Yeah, very difficult.
If you ever try to buy all that stuff, it's in a hurry. It's really difficult.
Yeah, I think the resilience you and Pip and the team showed during that period was outstanding, absolutely outstanding. And the fact that you had the same fire to do it all over again is envious, really.
So a Desert Island Discs question for you. During the course of that, if there was one thing, one memento, one piece of the past that you could have grabbed from that fire and kept, maybe something that didn't last, what would it be?
We used to have in our previous building, we used to have a lovely red 10K. Can't remember where we got it, but we got this massive 10K, and it sat outside the building. It was great. When we moved, of course, we all had nice shiny cladding. There was nowhere to really put it. So it sat in the corner of the warehouse and never did anything. Kept me thinking, got to put it up somewhere, got to do something with it. And I remember fighting my way through the rubble and sort of looking at how bad things were the morning we were let back into the building. And there was the 10K completely melted in the corner and just completely destroyed. And it was like, oh, I would love to have been able to take that out and done something with it, but it was just toast. Nothing we could do. I'd love to have had that.
I'm quite sad now. So
well,
Bryan,
I can always go to Bryan and see if he's got some lights.
Yeah, but I don't know if we got a 10K or not. Actually, we did have someone in today looking at a period job, and to help him out, I ended up fishing out one of my favourite photos from the, I think it must be late 60s, which is Mick Ronson and Bowie being lit by some a 264 and a couple of 743s. And so, you know, probably somewhere like Camden or something like that. And it's a great photo because I wouldn't be surprised if we'd supplied that gig back in those days in early 70s. And just remembering that rock and roll gigs were lit with theatre kit in the first few years because that's the only lights that were around. So,
yeah.
So that they do make us a bit nostalgic today.
So while we're on the nostalgic kick, here's a question from Gary White. Never heard of him. Where and what was your first day when you actually thought, I do this for a living? Your first day in the industry, Dave. Have you got a specific memory of standing somewhere and thinking, actually, I do this now?
My first ever tour was the Dead Kennedys. And I remember a friend of mine, Pete from Scan, sadly died. He was doing the PA and we rocked up in Liverpool with a few lights in the back, a bit of PA. And all of a sudden we were in this club in Liverpool. It's just horrible. And there we were doing the Dead Kennedys. It was great. You know, turn up at 5 o'clock. Everyone was late, you know. Band were all pissed off because we were late because we'd get held up on the motorway. Did the gig, all went really well. Wow, this was great. Day one of a tour. And I think the next day we were in St Austell or somewhere. Came out and somebody broke into the truck, completely smashed the inside up. And it was like, now we've got to work out how to get the indicators working and how to get it started. Well, this is the music industry.
Yeah.
And for the rest of the tour, we found Edwin Shirley because it was a Savium that we'd rented. And that Savium was overloaded a little bit. But we struggled to the next gig and sort of joining bits of wire out when you wanted to turn left and when you wanted to turn right. And you couldn't lock it for the rest of the tour. So, you know, we had to take our bags out and everything. And it was just a bit of a wreck. But that was my first day thinking, wow, this is the music industry. This is great.
And when was that?
That was actually 1982. 1982, that was. And that was my point where I said, well, I've got to give up work now and go and do this for a living. 6 months later, I was in LA with a band. Wow. You know, never had a passport. Never been to the Isle of Wight. Never been abroad at all. There I was in America, almost getting arrested for walking across the road. I didn't know anything about jaywalking, you know.
Excellent. And Bryan, how about you?
Have I got a proper job? Sorry, I didn't realise. Sorry.
It's just a hobby.
It's just a hobby, yeah. No, the main story that occurred to me on that was when we first moved to Wimbledon, because Wimbledon was Fulham. Those of you who went to Fulham, it was converted army stables with a cobbled yard, and then we overspilled into some old tram sheds down by the tube station, it was, I look back at it now and just go, how did we ever survive in there? And we moved to Wimbledon, which is, big, huge building, which we never thought we'd ever fill, let alone outgrow. But my parents were there. We moved in October. My parents were in London in November for Remembrance Day. I remember it very clearly. And I said, I'll show you the new office. So I took them down, went in on Sunday morning, we opened the door, and there's those of you who've been to White Light, the offices, on the first floor, there's the office through to the warehouse. I won't tell you what we used to call that door, but the door used to be kept shut because there was no heating in the warehouse. And I opened the door and, and it's 45,000 square foot warehouse. And my mum said, well, this is nice, dear. So which bit's White Light? And I'm going, all of it. And she was like, oh, how many people do you employ there? So, 120? And of course they were shopkeepers. And so for them, it was a completely alien concept. So I think actually the move to Wimbledon certainly made it professionalize, if that makes sense. But a story I told someone the other day was, I've now gone to the stage where I spend my life looking at spreadsheets and so on, because they don't let me touch lights anymore, for obvious reasons. And everyone's talking about D&B this and D&B that the other day. Well, it's a couple of years ago now. And I was going, why is everyone talking about Dun & Bradstreet? We use CreditSafe. Why are they talking about Dun & Bradstreet? And, and eventually I realized they were talking about black boxes with fuzzy things on the front that cost a lot of money.
Things move on. So, I mean, it's obvious that, you've put a massive amount into White Light, and Dave, you've put a huge amount into Neg Earth and growing these companies and giving something to the industry and becoming a staple and supporting crew and staff. What do you feel you personally have got back out of it? What's it done for you, Dave?
It's a good question, isn't it? Well, ultimately, an awful lot of satisfaction. I've managed to, build something out of nothing, which is, well, it's amazing in a way. It's just something that we just grown and grown and grown, and I'm immensely proud of it and what we have. Pip and I never thought we would be doing what we're doing now. It's difficult to describe, but I'm sure Bryan would agree. It's something that you don't lose. We have a lot of enthusiasm for the job and for the people and for the clients, and that's what drives us on every day.
I've got a great story about this. A friend of mine, when I first met Claire, she had a whole bunch of friends who were city-based solicitors. So they all wore suits and they all earned a lot of money. And I was nearly always late to when we met up for dinner and everything. And a whole bunch of us, about 8 of us, went sailing in the Med once for a weekend. And I was sitting at the front of the boat with one of them who it's become a really good mate. And we were sitting there, and I said, "Oh, penny for your thoughts." This was idyllic. We're sitting with our legs dangling over the front of a yacht. I think it was only the second time I'd ever been sailing. And penny for your thoughts. And this guy was a hedge fund trader at the time. He earned more money than God. Drove a TVR and an Aston Martin, had a second home, and all of that. And he just said, "I hate my job. I absolutely hate my job. But I've got so used to spending the money. I don't know what else to do." And the same guy, about 2 years later, I was in New York, and I saw him at the rugby the weekend before, and I said, "Oh, I'm in New York next." "Oh, I'm in New York." So we were both in New York. So he ended up, I said, "Well, I'm having dinner with some some new Broadway contacts, just between 6 and 7, because they've got to go back and do their show. Why don't we meet up at 7:30? So he came and met, and of course, it was a Broadway production manager, 2 Broadway production managers and a Broadway line designer. They didn't go back to their first preview. We stayed and had several more bottles. My mate John stayed with us. Eventually about 10:30, the line designer said, "I think I'm going to go do notes." I'm going, "No, I don't think you should go and do notes." But they toddled off, and my mate John just said, "So were they clients? Were they mates? Were they?" I said, "Well, they're sort of clients, but..." He said, "But you never talked work all evening. You just had a crack." I said, "Well, the industry is about relationships. I build those relationships with those guys. They're based in America, but when they come over to the UK, they pick the phone up and they say, 'Bryan, can you sort us out? Or I get phone calls from people they know, say, Bryan, I've been told to phone you because. And that's how you do that, over a glass or four of wine. And he went, now I understand. I said, what do you mean now I understand? He said, now I understand why you're the only fucking one of us who actually enjoys their job. You're the only one who isn't desperate to retire. Yeah, the rest of them are all desperate to retire, get out of what they did. But I would say 90% of people I've come across, again, one of my things, I think I've only met 2 people in 30 odd years who, if I could get away with taking a baseball bat to, I would. Yeah, and I've met a lot of people over the years. We attract as an industry really nice people. I mean, of course there's a few arseholes, but you just tend to avoid them. But the majority, I think, Dave, you'd agree, most of the people you deal with, you actually like, and you like spending time with.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's, the one of the joys that you guys have is that you're both more on the performing side of it, or on the performance side of it. So it's events, our job is to give people pleasure, is to give them a good night in the theatre, a good night in the stadium, and go home cheerful and happy, having enjoyed themselves. And I always like to stand at the back and think, out of all these people, one of them is applauding me. They don't know what I did. They don't know I was there, but that's what they're doing. We get a little bit of that credit. And that's, I think, what kind of washes down through everyone. Where were we? Bryan, sorry, the question for you, Dave and his Desert Island Discs 10K. If you, through some bizarre circumstance, were going to be locked in the warehouse for the best part of a year with no way of getting out, what would you take in? What would you bring into work that you feel is missing?
I'd have to take the phone because, as those of you know me, I'm addicted to. I even had in our wedding vows. We only got married last year after 25 years together, and Claire had in her wedding vows that she had to make the tea more often, and I had to play with my phone less often. We have both single-handedly failed on both vows. But yes, no, I am a little bit addicted to my little bit of technology. I mean, we've got a warehouse, we've got a kettle, so I'd be very happy. The one I've done a couple of site jobs recently, and nothing to do with the fact that they're covering the lighting for the rugby. That's not at all the reason I volunteered to be an unpaid member of crew. But the first one, there's no crew catering anymore on broadcast jobs. So the second job I did, we did take a kettle and a box of tea bags, and in fact that was my main job, I think.
Excellent. And so, we've talked about relationships and people getting on and everyone working towards a common goal. Do you guys ever come across each other in a competitive way? Dave, are you ever fighting white light for gigs?
Not really. Bryan and I think we have our sectors, our areas of the market pretty defined, and we don't usually bump into each other.
We did a joint gig last week.
Did we?
Yeah, Gary Barlow at Natural History Museum.
Oh, yes.
You did the floor package and we did the museum.
It looked good on the telly.
Did look good.
There you go. There's a whole new industry starting up here.
No, yeah. We...
How to like dinosaurs.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we've all been doing that for a long time.
I think Dave's been doing more than us. But yeah, we come across it is literally once or twice a year, I would think, that the negs are quoted on something we're doing. We probably tread on Dave's toes more often than he treads on ours because we're a bit more diversified and looking for new angles. But I don't think we've ever fallen out over it. Don't think so, have we? No.
This time yet.
I got shouted at by Pip for we lost some scrollers of yours once.
I don't remember that. But...
we apparently dropped them off. We were late. Well, I don't know who. I think it was a cab, and they left them in the car park, and they got buried. And we were saying, no, we've definitely returned them. And of course, they were buried in the car park under something or behind something, and I got shouted at by Pip. But
Oh dear.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm sure you deserved it.
Almost definitely.
So there's various questions popping up in the Q&A that we'll come on to in a minute. And if any of you guys want to ask your questions live, then raise your hands and we'll bring you into part of the panel. We'll bring you up out of the auditorium with a follow spot and some walk-up music. And you can join us up here on stage and feel how bright those bloody lights are and realize that you can't see a thing. And come and ask Dave and Bryan your questions live. But in the meantime, another one from me. One of the things that impresses me about this industry is that whenever people get together in a bar, which seems to be about 95% of the time, all we do is tell stories about things that have gone wrong. And anybody from outside the industry joining us must be quite disheartened, especially clients, when they listen to it. So do either of you have a favorite disaster story?
Well, I could tell the story of when the truck turned up and it didn't have anything in it. That was a good one. And there was a few embarrassing things there, but luckily we weren't there. We didn't truck it. It was another trucking company who I can't say. But yes, the truck was empty. It was a rather we'll go to catering and hang out there for a while. We'll wait for that truck to arrive and then we'll be very busy for a while.
Those of you remember the semaphore colour changes. We had a tour, a ballet tour that had 50 Parkam ones, and there were only 50 in the country. I think we used to supply them off Mick at Selco. And so we had all of the 50 that were available for this tour. And it was good being ballet was in rep. So 1 week they'd do, it was Simple Man, Northern Ballet. 1 week they'd do Northern Ballet, Simple Man. The following week they'd do something else. And the trucking company lost the truck. They put it in a trailer during one of the weekend moves. Put the trailer in a lay-by somewhere and couldn't remember where. It was before the days of GPS. So suddenly we were faced with trying to find 50 more semaphore colour changes. And that was quite a challenge. And I seem to remember that's how Mr. Isherwood ended up at White Light, because he was at Imperial at the time. And we suddenly had to cut, they insisted on us colouring them up. You remember those days, we had to put the colour in the semaphore. And I phoned Imperial up and just said, does anyone fancy some casual work for a few days, putting some colour into colour changes? And Dave Isherwood and Paul Simpson turned up, and they've never got round to leaving. That was about 30 years ago.
So it seems to be a truck-based story.
Yes.
Yes, I remember standing in Birmingham with the Bolshoi tour, and we'd spend all night putting the lights up, and then the stage crew came in and their trailer opened up, and rather than Spartacus, it was all the washing machines that the Bolshoi had bought to take back to Moscow with them. So they went to the equivalent of catering for a few hours while someone swapped it around. Right, I'm going to move on to some of the questions that are coming from the guys on the side here. So from Jack, what's the one piece of tech you feel has changed the business?
I would say, as someone was suddenly realising I've been around too long, I would say DMX. Certainly the first half of the career, I would say DMX suddenly actually having a universal control system, rather than, if those of us who remember what was there beforehand, being able to actually not having to have the same manufacturer's desk as the moving lights, as the dimmers, and the fact that you could universally link all of this technology together. But it's quite a boring piece of technology. Dave, give us a more interesting piece of tech.
Well, the whole thing about moving lights, there were no moving lights, were there, until a Vari-Light came along, and then all of a sudden, we got to a stage where High End brought out a studio colour and a studio spot, and you could buy them, and you could buy loads of them, and everybody liked them, and all of a sudden, it's more and more and more moving lights, and that's a major tipping point for us. And then, of course, people put them on a kinesis truss, and they all moved. So not only did you have moving trusses and moving lights, but you had a massive show out of it. I think that's a big thing that happened, a big tipping point where you could just go out and buy all this stuff and you had an instant show. It was just the way that it was then driven. But
and you kind of touched on it earlier when we were talking about the youth of today who are coming in and playing with all of this. And I'm insanely jealous of all the fantastic toys they get to play with. But do you feel that it's bringing forward a different type of person who is capable of hanging from a truss and understanding how to program everything that's on it as well? Has the lighting tech changed?
They don't hang off a truss. They sit behind their laptop and work everything out from there. The patch, how it's all going to fit in a truck. It's all done by laptop. And there's some little elves that come in during the middle of the night and put it all in the truck for him.
But do you feel that lighting as a discipline is kind of disappearing and joining up with video quite a lot? The lines are becoming a little bit more blurred. It used to be that the lights washed out the screen. Now the screen washes out the lights and everything is controlled by the same systems. Is it all kind of coming together?
There's an element of that, and we've talked a few times about whether we end up being a visual company rather than a lighting company and a video company and stuff like that. I think we're still some time off that. There is definitely a lighting discipline, certainly in some of our core markets like theatre. But Dave's right in terms of the technology, the laptop-based technology. All the RDM stuff, and I can't remember who it was now was telling me a story about they didn't have a single light fail on I think it was one of your tours, Dave, because they were using RDM, because they were able to monitor the temperature of the units during the day and were able to proactively swap out a unit because obviously its fan wasn't keeping it down to temperature well enough. So they didn't ever have it fail in anger, as it were. They just swapped it out on the next move. Which, that sort of stuff,
well, the quality of the moving lights, the cost of the moving lights, it all goes up. But that reliability is there now, where you can put up hundreds of lights and you plug them in and they work. And you have very few failures with some of the quality manufacturers we have. It's great. Whereas we used to put up all those starlights many years ago, and that you just put them up and take them down and put them up and take them down, and they still wouldn't work.
Well, you had to have a technician for every 16 Vari lights.
Yeah.
And a little black tent in the middle.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the hospital and the ACS rack.
We all sound like a pair of old farts, aren't we?
Yeah, I know. All right. Well, let's move on a little bit. Well, staying with the reminiscence. So, Bryan, what show are you most proud of? And Dave, obviously, I'm going to ask you what tour you're most proud of.
Yeah, I get asked this staff inductions when we used to employ staff, and I generally give a different answer to each one. But one recurring one, sadly, it's just closed in Macau. We took on a project in Macau, 2008 or something like that, and it was just huge. I mean, in financial terms, it was worth 6 months' revenue. It took us 2 years to do. But it was bonkers. It was a Cirque du Soleil-esque. It was Dragon in a purpose-built theatre in. And it just, there were so many experiences involved in that, like, having to go to Macau once a month for a couple of months, 6 months. Being in some of the most bizarre meetings where they just filled the meetings room with meeting. It was the first time I'd heard the expression meeting room, because they had to have more people in the room than you. So there would be me and Simon Needle sitting there, and there'd be 8 of them, but only one of them spoke, but they had to have more people in the room than you. And just, watching that project grow from a hole in the ground all the way up, that was quite, and delivering it on time, on schedule, and dare I say, making quite a lot of money out of it. So actually that's quite a nice thing, because going back to tipping point, that was a tipping point. Well, off the back of that, we picked up 2 or 3 big overseas projects that again were pretty profitable. And I think when was the crash? 2008, 2009, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So again, the income from those projects cushioned us quite well through the decline of, there was no corporate work in that time, was there? 2009, 2010. Yeah, all the corporate hospitality stuff dropped. So that'd be probably top. It'd certainly be in my top 10.
Okay, and Dave, how about you, tour-wise or show-wise?
Tour-wise, well, I would say 1993, Peter Gabriel, Us. That was a pretty amazing tour.
Is that the one with the stage that came out into the auditorium?
Yeah.
With Cyberlights?
We had Super Scans.
Super Scans, that was it.
Just
that was extraordinary. I saw that as a punter. Absolutely.
I saw it as well, yeah.
That's just one of the best shows ever I've seen and worked on. It was a really, really great. And, from the artist down, just an amazing experience. The production manager told me, just forget everything you know about lighting because we're going to reinvent it. We're going to do all these crazy things. And we did do some great things. And it was a really, really enjoyable job. Very long rehearsal, very painful rehearsal. And then when it came to move it was quite a struggle. And
but when was that? 93, did you say?
1993, yeah. Yep.
Now I remember it, Earl's Court very clearly.
Yep.
Extraordinary gig. Extraordinary.
And it was just a really, really interesting job. And some of the things that we came up with and some of the ideas they had. And we had a little screen at the back that spun round and all sorts of things. And then, again, we did another tour with Peter Gabriel about 10, 12 years later. It was just amazing again. But that first one was just something else. It was just great. Really, really well done.
So you're both in a very privileged position here in that you can probably get in to see most shows that you want to. What would be your favorite if you could go back and see something, maybe something that you didn't see that you wish you had?
Ooh. Actually, I'd never seen the House of the Dancing Water show. I never actually saw the show. I saw the rehearsals, but I never actually saw the show. And it's now closed forever. Which is that would. But seeing the rehearsals was almost more bonkers than seeing the show because it was they don't call it rehearsals, they call it creation. And I remember watching one afternoon, watching rehearsal, and then we went off and had a cup of tea. Luke Laffertune was the LD, and I went off for a cup of tea with him, and we came back after the break, and it started creation again, and after about half an hour, I realised that actually it was exactly the same script, if there was a script, as what he'd been rehearsing before, but completely differently. He was just trying to do two different ways of doing the same bit of the story. And I'm like, this is surreal. So in many ways, seeing the rehearsal was almost more fun than seeing the show. Especially when I've never been, I've sat through a lot of tech rehearsals, but when someone comes on the God mic and says, we need to break now because the divers have reached their limit on how long they can be underwater. and Dragone, Franco Dragone, the director, was like, no, I need to go for another 10 minutes. And I think it might have been Steve Colley actually was on the mic. Go, no, we have to. They will die if we do not get them out of the pool because it was a water-based show, and they've been in there for 4 hours, and they will run out of air if we don't let them out soon.
I think it was Steve and James Lee, wasn't it? I think James was on that.
Could have been. Yeah.
Cirque du Soleil, brilliant shows.
Yeah.
Saltimbanco, the first one in the Albert Hall, that was a pretty amazing show.
Yeah.
They are always good entertainment, aren't they?
Yeah, really, really, really good. Well, really well thought out, and the way that it fitted into the Albert Hall, and they spent that time making sure it was just really well choreographed to the Albert Hall. Just really, really interesting again to do. And we were just a very small cog of it, but it was great to be involved.
It's always nice to see the effort that you put in making something worthwhile.
I think a few times on that. You did a little bit of Cirque, didn't you, Brian? And we did a little bit of Cirque.
They were always interesting clients to deal with. French Canadian.
So a question here from Philip Norfolk.
Yeah.
Philip Norfolk. Who in the industry or outside it has given you some great advice, and what was it? Who's going to go first on that one?
It's a tough. I mean, I should be saying John Simpson, because I worked with him for 30 odd years.
He's not watching. You're all right, Brian. You can say what you like.
Oh, yeah, and I shared an office with. I'm not, but I can't actually ever remember a single thing where he said. But my main thing I learned from him was, I rarely left a conversation with him pissed off. No, in fact, for years I never. Whenever I went in to talk to him and say, well, I want to do this, I want to do that, and he would change my mind. I would leave the room happy with the decision. He would explain why he was making the decision, even if it wasn't the decision I wanted. He didn't just ever say, no, not doing that. No, not, he was always a great communicator, or he is always a great communicator in terms of not just saying no, but explaining why he was saying no, so much so that I almost forgot that I'd asked the question in the first place. So he was definitely one. And Brian Croft was another one. And again, I wish I could remember, when I shared an office with him my first couple of years at TP, and he was a fantastic mentor. I think he probably taught me to enjoy myself and not take life too seriously. That was probably the main lesson from Crofty, or not take anything too seriously.
Brian, I'm sure not. Dave, who have been your mentors along the way?
Well, we have a great accountant. I have to say, we've followed his advice over the years, and he said some great things to me in the past, like, just go and buy those lights, Dave. Just go and do it. Go and sort all that out. Go get those jobs. And it was great enthusiasm from him and great advice from him. And that's lived with Pip and I for many, many years. I think his sort of belief in what we could do and how we could push things along was very, very much a part of why we pushed so hard at times to go out and get those tours. We knew that we could, put a plan together to go and get the money and get on with the work, which was, it's a very sort of stabilizing influence. And I think those sort of words from him will live with me forever.
Excellent. So we've got two more questions in the box. We've got 5 minutes left on the clock. So let's see if we can go through these. What's the best order? So Matt Humphrey, what is your best, scariest, or funniest show must go on moment? That moment where you thought, actually, we might not make it this time.
Got a good one.
Really? There's a surprise.
The Black Crows at the Albert Hall. And it had been a long day, I think it was the first gig of the tour. And I went down to see the guys, and the show was about to start. And house lights go down at the Albert Hall, big expectation, the crowd go mad. And the first part of the show is to pull the kabuki. And just as they pull the kabuki, someone had done up the wing nut on the truss, and the kabuki pipe was not going to move. Pete Courier, he climbs the ladder really quickly, gets up there and releases the wing nut, pulls the kabuki, and it empties on top of the band as they go on stage. It was a great moment. There was lots of people trying to get the band out, and the band were underneath the drape, and they went on stage a bit ruffled. I got reamed by the tour manager and the production manager. It's great though. I was laughing, but it wasn't funny. But it was. Sometimes
it's worth the bollocking to be able to tell the story afterwards.
It was a bit of a Spinal Tap moment, but it's always a good one to tell.
Brian, how about you?
Mine is a techier one. I doubt if there's anyone on the call who ever dealt with Pan Command and Morpheus, but back in probably 95, we bought their first moving lights that they sold. And Dobbin, Mike Odom, had picked 6 for Rocky Horror tour. It was starting in Plymouth, and we had 24 on a Tommy Steele tour at the same time. And they were both rigged. The lights were all rigged. You could test the lights and everything. The lights were rigged in Plymouth and in the Old Vic. The old Rocky Horror was in Plymouth. And we had a problem with the desk. and then this is before the days of emails and stuff like that. And we eventually spoke to someone in California and said, "Oh, I think we might have sent you the wrong software for the desk." And I think they sent the software via CompuServe to Pete Willis in Chiswick. We then who blew it onto an EEPROM. We then sent a bike to fetch the EEPROM from Chiswick, and we were sitting in the office in Fulham, and we put it in, and we couldn't get these two desks just weren't going to boot up. And this was Tuesday during the day. Wednesday night was the only night of Rocky Horror. That we had a bit more time on Tommy Steele, but Wednesday night was the only night with a paid audience and 6 movie nights. The whole design was based around no desk, and we just we had 4 or 5 hours of just playing, of just going what the fuck, because we couldn't speak to California because they were shut, they were dark, and we decided to move the desks from one desk to another, and the desks were based with a PC with a cable to a customized keyboard. And we moved one end of the office to another to give someone some room. They wanted to sit at their desk. And suddenly these desks booted into life, or this desk booted into life. We're like, what's that? Turns out they had this ribbon connector, 64-piece ribbon connector. And whoever made it had made it the wrong way round. So they just shaved off the locating pin on the ribbon connector so that you could put the ribbon connector in the wrong way round. And in moving the desk, we accidentally put the ribbon connector in the wrong way round, and the desk booted into life. And that was 2:00 on Tuesday afternoon. There was only 2 people who knew how to program the desk in the country. One of those, Paul Franklin, was at the Old Vic. He was one, and it was programmed down in Plymouth. Can't remember. But basically, I went and fetched. I put the desk into I had an old Volvo. I put the desk into the back of my car. Went and fetched Paul from the Old Vic. I kidnapped him, and I got to Plymouth by 6:00. I don't think Paul's ever been in a car with me ever since, because I'm still not sure you should legally be able to get from Waterloo to Plymouth in 3 hours. And Dobbin was brilliant. Paul Maloney, I think, pushed buttons, and we just worked through the night programming. Dobbin put in something like 600 cues overnight, and the show happened the next day, and everyone was very happy. But I remember going out into the street and weeping with relief when that desk booted into life, because I was going to have to phone Howard Panther and just say, "I'm afraid you're going to have to pull the show tomorrow," and because they couldn't do the show without the lights. So that's my scariest one.
Scary moment. So, and as a final question, if you were to stop tomorrow, what would be the single best moment in your career? And you can branch out into personal stuff if you want to at this point. Dave.
Going to the O2 and seeing the Stones and looking up and thinking that was our lighting rig. That was a pretty monumental moment.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yep.
How about you, Brian?
I'm fairly certain my missus isn't logged in, so I don't have to say I met her through work. I haven't told her how to log in. So obviously that is a very important moment. Similar today, being able to go to the Rugby World Cup final and pretend to be I had to push the plinth off the pitch just before kickoff, and then push the plinth back onto the pitch just after the final whistle. So that was pretty cool. That was a cool moment. That wasn't really a huge amount of kit. In many ways, I'd be slightly cheesy and say if I had to stop tomorrow, what would be the best day of my career? It would be tomorrow. It has been an amazing. It is an amazing industry. It's an amazing. There's obviously been low moments, but we recruit really, really good people. As an industry, we attract really, really good people. Segueing into the 2020 stuff, you look at the efforts that people are putting in on behalf of other people for We Make Events and stuff.
Yeah.
The selflessness that's going on, the time, the hours that people are putting in. I mean, that video that's come out today, we were going to use it. I originally thought, I'll show that as the opening for the town hall meeting with the staff today. And no, there's no way I could follow that. I couldn't speak after that. So yeah, we attract fantastic people, and we're still attracting great people. You know, I spend a lot of time, because they won't let me do anything important. With the new entrants to the industry, the apprentices, the college grads, and we're still attracting really good people, really nice people. We don't meet many arseholes.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's the joy of what we all do, and that's why people have dialed in record-breaking numbers to listen to you guys talk.
We got double figures,
well into double figures.
Wow.
It puts a stone's tour into the shade, Dave. It's honestly, we're way up there. But I think as the business has become more standardized and less extraordinary, the people within it haven't changed. And they are still extraordinary. And that's why everyone is getting together with We Make Events and with all the Facebook groups and everything else that's going on. And why you're all here to listen to this evening. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining in. Thank you for the questions. I hope that Bryan and Dave have inspired you to carry on doing this, and either to work for them or to employ them, depending on which side of the coin you're on. And please remember to go back to the Speakeasy website. Remember to join in with everything that's going on. I've heard fantastic reviews of the quiz. I haven't managed to make either of them so far, but it's definitely in my diary for next Monday. Join in with that. Go through all the other links and be there for other people. So thank you all very much. Thank you, John, for organising this. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Dave, for giving us your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.